Lead me to some soul today. Oh, teach me.
Welcome, everyone, to episode number 43 of a series of episodes. Those of you who've been listening and watching, you know what we call it, leading others to Christ. During these episodes, we'll be focused on evangelism. And one of our goals is to stir everyone up to try to get us focused again on evangelism and thinking about the area of reaching our family or friends or neighbors with the gospel of Christ. My name is Dan Barker, and I preach for the Creekside Church of Christ in Franklin, Indiana. And I've done this every time too. I need to change this up probably sometime. But Franklin is about 20 miles south of downtown Indianapolis, to give you an idea of where we are. And I also serve as one of the shepherds there. For those of you that know me, you know that I'm passionate about evangelism, and I have been ever since I obeyed the gospel when I was 21 years old in Owensboro, Kentucky. And I really have been over the years. Anything I could find or read, anybody that I could talk to try to learn of different ways and different methods of teaching, and to find something that I felt comfortable with and obviously would teach the truth, but to be able to use. And with all this COVID stuff, when it started, came up with this idea of doing what we're doing here, of trying to find those that are out there that are involved in teaching others, find out who they are, where they are, how they do it. And it's been just really exciting for me. And probably 60% of the people I've never met in person yet. Lord willing, we'll have that chance. But what we try to do is, using some Bible phrases that I've used every time too, is learning how to teach others to teach, how to be a fisher of men, as Jesus said, and remembering what Paul said to Timothy in 2 Timothy 2:2, and the things that you've heard from me among many witnesses, commit these to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. And then later in that chapter, he was talking to Timothy about being useful for the master. Well, I want to be useful for the master. And I think everyone that's listening to this podcast would say the same thing. But anyway, we're excited today to have somebody with us that we're going to learn a lot from. So I encourage you to get out your pen and paper, not if you're driving, get out your pen and paper and take some notes here. But we have with us today Bill Robinson. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you, Dan. Good to be with you.
Yeah, it's an honor for us to have you with us today. I was trying to think, Bill. Well, let me start with Bill and his wife Judy work with the Perry Hill Church of Christ there in Montgomery, Alabama. And where did we meet the first time? Do you remember? Was it there in Lexington?
Yeah, it was in Lexington. And, it's interesting. The first time I remember meeting you is you came and needed to use the baptistry to baptize somebody.
Okay.
And that's when I first met you. And I wish I could remember who you baptized, but that was, I soon came to learn that was going to be a common occurrence when I lived in Lexington. That either you or Dan Byers, one of the two.
Yes. Yeah. We had helped start the Fayette Church of Christ there, and we didn't have a baptistry for a long time. And we really appreciate University Heights and helping us with that. And we have a similar thing here in Franklin with the congregation. We just recently moved into a new location, and we've got a portable baptistry, which we haven't had. We've been using all the congregations around. So, but anyway, and when you said that, I remember coming into your office there, and so it's really good to see you again. And be sure and tell Judy we said hi.
We started. Hi. She's probably listening. She's my number one fan.
Well, that's good.
And my number one critic.
Oh, well, see, that's part of her job, right?
That's right.
We start every episode out with doing this, Bill, where we call it the elevator pitch or the short bio. And if you would tell everybody where you were born and how old you were when you obeyed the gospel and who taught you, and kind of bring us up to speed.
Well, you kind of scared me there a minute. Tell everybody where you were born and how old you were. I thought, well, Dan.
Go ahead.
I was born in California, Southern California, Fontana. And my parents were always Christians. And so I've grown up knowing the truth. I haven't always lived it and I struggled with it for a long time, high school and right out of high school, and then got my act together. And as my good friend and just departed Ed Harrell would say, I was a late bloomer in some ways. And but we lived in Southern California. I grew up there, and Orange County. We moved to Orange County, and that's where I spent the rest of my growing up. And then I moved to Bakersfield, California, to begin preaching in 1975. I preached by appointment up until then, every Sunday, driving 175 miles for $35 a week. And had they only known, I'd have paid them that $35 to let me preach. I wanted to preach so bad. And so I'd preach my sermon 2 or 3 times going up and up there. And I know people on the freeway would look at me and say, what is that guy doing? And but I would preach it all the way up there. And then I moved 4 or 5 years later to Arizona, just long enough. I lived there for a year, just long enough to meet Judy and marry her. And Judy, of course, is a Lexington native, and her dad worked for IBM. I've been moved. And so that's how we met there in Arizona and married in that year in 1980. And then we moved to Wichita Falls, Texas, had a great work there, wonderful time. It was a place of first for us, first place we worked, first place our kids were born, both our children. I have 2 daughters. One of them's in Houston, Texas, and Katie, and then another one's up in Salem, Indiana, just below you, just across the river from Louisville. Brian is a preacher, so Elise gets absolutely no sympathy from me. She knew what she was doing when she married a preacher. I have 4 of the greatest grandsons you could ever find.
That's great.
In my opinion. I know everybody's grandkids are wonderful, and they should be. Then we moved from Wichita Falls to Fort Worth, Castleberry, and lived there about 5 years. Didn't think I'd ever really leave there. Then my friend R.J. Stevens, whom I knew as a teenager, begged me to move to Kemp, Texas. They were struggling, and so we helped them. Moved to Greenville, Texas a few years later, and then moved to Lexington and lived there 12 and a half years. And then moved to Gardendale, Alabama. I was there about 4 or 5 years, and then moved to Jacksonville to work with my good friend Ed Harrell, who had been after me to move. And so we were there 6.5 years, and then I ended up here, and we're at Perry Hill Road. So that's sort of the thumbnail sketch, the bio. I told you about my dad. He was in the insurance business. He was one of the greatest personal evangelists I ever knew. And I have had guys tell me, come out of the pulpit when I was just started preaching, and would tell me about my dad. They would say to me, you know, he baptized more people in Southern California than anybody I know. He would finish a deal on life insurance, Dan, and would say, okay, I've taken care of your life insurance. And he'd pull out his testament and say, now I want to talk about your soul's insurance. And that was his line.
Yes.
And he baptized a lot of people. One of my favorite stories, this was as he was older. He was in his 80s. This was a year or 2 before he died. And this is how he ended up living with us in Lexington, where he passed away. I got a call from my mom and said, your dad, we're having real problems. He had been diagnosed with multiple myeloma. They had him on massive doses of prednisone. And so it sort of makes you hallucinate a little bit. But anyway, I said, well, what's the deal? And he said, well, he went over across the street to the neighbor's house with a table in his hand and his Bible. And it was 11 o'clock at night. George called me and said, Bill's over here. So I had to go over and get him. So I brought him home. I brought them both home, and they never left. They never went back to West Virginia again where they were living. They stayed with me. So after the prednisone wore off and he had seen a new doctor in Lexington, my dad said, how did I end up here? And so I told him, I said, well, Mom called me one night and said you had gone over to George's house with a table and your Bible. And George called and said, you know, Bill's over here and he's got a table. And so she came and got me. And I said, do you remember that? And he said, yeah. He said, I remember it well. I said, well, what were you doing? He had taken a TV tray and a Bible. And he said, I was always determined to teach George the truth. And I'd go over there and he'd always say, well, Bill, I don't have time. Or the last time I talked to him, he said, well, Bill, he said, I really don't have a table here that we can sit down and study. And he said, so I decided I was going to take a table with me and my Bible, and we're going to sit down and study. So he was going to be without any excuse. And he never, of course, had any luck with George. But anyway, that was sort of the way he was. It didn't make any difference where he went. He could talk to anybody. I mean, as the old saying goes, he could sell a refrigerator to an Eskimo when it came to personal evangelism, and he was concerned about it. As I told you before we started the show, his attitude was, you can come to my house once and we're going to visit, but if you come the second time, we're going to talk about the Bible. You're not going to get away without talking about the Bible. And that's how he felt. I mean, he truly believed that.
Thanks for sharing this with everybody, but it's just, and I know you know this, but what a blessing, right? I mean, so many blessings that you've had, but grow up with mom and dad being Christians, and because we've talked about so many of the ones that we've interviewed, they did not grow up, if you will, in the church, and different background and different experience in learning the truth. But just the things that you learn by being around Dad that you may not even still realize, that things that you've picked up from him, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Little mannerisms and comments and things like that are just huge that I think are so important in leading others to Christ, to be able to start those conversations. And so that's wonderful that your dad was that way. How old was he when he passed? How old was he
84,
when he passed?
83 or 84. I can't remember, Dan, 83 or 84. I wish I had his ability to do that really well like he does. And I mean, but he was such a natural at it. It was just, and I think you make an interesting point. You say you came up, and I'm paraphrasing and ad-libbing here a little bit, but you say you nearly came up out of the water wanting to teach people the truth.
Yes.
And I think in part because the same with my dad, and that is when you learn the truth from the vantage point of a lie. And I don't mean that in a bad sense against anybody. I'm just saying you're now learning the truth, and you now realize you've been in error, and you don't want anybody else to be in error. Whereas, and I don't mean this in any bad way, when all you've ever known is the truth, I think the thing that scares me is, would I have had the courage to learn the truth had I not been raised as a Christian? So I am always thankful or raised in a home by Christians. So I am always thankful for that. Because I'm not sure that I would have had the depth of conviction or courage to do that. I would hope that I would, but I don't know. And I'm glad I don't have to find out. Well, so I think there is, in that same sense, when you read 1st and 2nd Timothy, that's Paul's point to Timothy. Quit being so timid. You've grown up with this all your life. You know this. And so get out there and do it. And so I think it is a tendency for those of us who are, quote unquote, raised in the church to be a little timid about it. I mean, because that's all we've ever known. Right. And so and so sometimes it's really hard for us to figure out why people believe what they believe, and why do they not see it like we see it. I mean, we grew up believing that the whole time, and other people did not. And Paul is the one that said, brethren, my heart's desire and prayer for Israel is that they might be saved. I mean, he wanted them saved. He even went so far as in the 9th chapter of Romans to say, I could wish myself accursed for their sake if it would bring them, but that's not going to work. And so, you have that sense of learning the truth from the vantage point of a lie, and it just is overwhelming to you in the sense that, wow, look what I found. And I don't mean that we've got, a lot of Christians and good preachers and faithful Christians that were raised in the church that are very active and very sincere in serving the Lord, who have always known the truth. But it is very easy for us to take things for granted for those of us who were raised in the church. And I know that. And I think 1st and 2nd Timothy make that point. Yeah,
I think so too. And you said it there. I was getting ready to say it. If you grow up with it, you take advantage of it's all you've ever known, and you don't understand why everybody doesn't see it because but when you've been outside of that and can see from the outside looking in, boy, you look at it with different eyes. And you're right. Even when you have this conversation, you have to be careful of how you say it, because like yourself, I mean, you grew up in the church, and influence of Dad and others, and here you are, still working, and we praise God for that. Let's change just a little bit. Tell us a little bit about Perry Hill congregation.
It's been around a pretty good while. It used to be called Gay Meadows back years and years ago, and they bought this property here. It's a great location. It's a aging congregation, so we're really pushing personal evangelism really hard here, just because that's what we ought to be doing regardless of the age of the congregation. But we're in a good location. We have 4 elders. The congregation is about 125, I think, 130 maybe on Sunday morning. Okay. Montgomery is the majority in Montgomery is Black. Whites are in the minority. So our congregation makeup is 20, 30%, something like that, Black. Okay. And I lived in the neighborhood that was a nice upper middle class neighborhood. Both sides of me and across the street were Black neighbors. I mean, the racial thing here is not, well, I know it's a problem. Don't misunderstand me. But we loved every one of them, and they loved us, and had good neighbors, and is here in the church. My best friend, one of my best friends is a Black retired teacher from Faulkner University, and also served as a major in the Marine Corps. And so he and I have become really good friends, and I just love him dearly. And we spend Friday nights, before the pandemic, spent Friday nights together, he and his wife and Judy and I. And so just a walking Bible is what he is, and just a wonderful fellow.
All right. Well, because I know in talking to the different ones we've interviewed, and you and I talked about this the other day, but for example, you grew up in California, you've lived in, if I miss one here, you preached and lived in Texas, you were in Kentucky, Alabama, Florida, back to Alabama now. And would you agree with me? It's a silly comment, really, but the church is the same, but look how different it is in every area.
Yeah, there are certainly regional differences. I mean,
yeah,
that cannot be ignored or go unnoticed, I should say. Not ignored, but they just don't go unnoticed. And it's, I think people love to slam California that are from the East. And but it is culturally, there are sound churches in California, many sound churches in California, really good churches. And some guys doing some great work out there in a difficult place. Most of us know Royce Bell, who is at San Bernardino. That's the church where my dad lived, and that's where we attended when I was born in Fontana. And we had some really close relationships there. That's where I first started preaching for RJ. I'd fill in for him. They'd call me and ask me if I'd come in and fill in when he'd go off on the meeting. I watched that congregation go down because of its location and that sort of thing. And then the things that they've done to build that up, Royce has done a wonderful work out there. I just hear from a lot of different people. The challenge of being there, I know where he is a tremendous challenge. And yet it can be done, and it's working. And so I think about San Bernardino. I've known Royce a long time, and he's just done a good work out there. And so people can slam California all they want because they don't know. And I suspect that people in California probably they're down the nose sometimes at Southern churches because it's the Bible Belt. I don't know, but
sure.
Anyway, there are just those regional differences that happen. And so we have to be very careful. It is the church, and you know where you are when you go. If I go visit out in California or they come out to Alabama, they know exactly where they are when they come to church. We do the same things they do.
Right.
So, that standpoint, but there are some regional differences.
And some of those differences gets into what we've talked about with some of the others that we've interviewed of the approaches, how they would be different. the studies, perhaps the tools that you're using that might be different, just again, depending upon on the makeup of the community. And you have to know that. You have to know that if you're there working and know what your environment is and know what the how many folks are there from different with all the immigration and everything in some of the communities. Just like there's a new mosque that just was put in Greenwood, Indiana. And you don't think about that until you see things like that and see the influence and the number of people that are coming in. So I could meet somebody and talk to somebody at a restaurant or at the post office or something and say, well, hey, nice to meet you. Where are you from originally? And find out that, well, they're from, they're from in Europe or someplace over there and moved here, and that's where they worship. And just so how would I approach them and all those type things? You know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
I know one of the things that you do, and I want to talk about this because you told me a funny story the other day of when you started this 2 minutes with Bill Robinson. If somebody wanted to go and listen to that, how do they connect to that?
Well, there's a couple different ways. The easiest way is go to perryhillchurch.org, and under sermons, look for 2 minutes. And then there's all the 2 minutes I've done, some 225, 250 of them are all listed right there.
Would you tell the story? Well, and I've listened to several of those, and you do a really good job with that, and it's a good tool. Tell everybody the story you said when you started that in Texas, and the two people on the radio that you were in between.
Oh, well, I was telling Dan how I came up with the name 2 Minutes for Bill Robinson. And I was living in Greenville, Texas, and I was trying to do something to reach out to the community. You know, things are changing. I mean, again, not only just regional, but time and cultural changes. And, you know, I don't rule out anything to being done, but there are some things that we used to do years ago that don't necessarily work as well today. So anyway, I was trying to reach out something different. And so I talked to a friend of mine and asked him about radio. He had been familiar with radio, had done tons of radio work years and years. And so I asked him, give me a name. And he said, I would just do 2 minutes with Bill Robinson. So I did a 2 minute radio spot between Paul Harvey and Rush Limbaugh in Greenville, Texas. And they were the only station to carry Rush Limbaugh at the time. He was just getting started. It was probably his second year, maybe third year. He was just getting started. And then, of course, Paul Harvey was just an icon. And everybody loved to listen to Paul Harvey. And so you had, and Greenville was a farming community for the most part, agricultural. And so you had, the farmers would come in and lunch and they'd turn on their radios. I mean, because radio is a companion medium. And so they would turn on the radios to listen for lunch. And there I was. And so I had people from all over North Texas because this station was the only station that carried Rush Limbaugh live. And so they would come, they would call and everything else. And I had people come from all the way over in Dallas, which is 50 miles away, just to hear me preach because they'd heard me on the radio. I had Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison. I did a thing on abortion in 2 minutes, and her campaign manager called me and said she wanted to use it that night. Could I get that over to them if they sent somebody to get it? And I said, yeah, I would be glad to give them the text. And then so this thing just went over so well. One of the deacons came in one day and said, or one of the members came in one day bragging about how this was going over and he just loved it. He just couldn't wait to hear it. Blah, 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 blah. I mean, just laying it on me really heavy. And I was eating it up. And he finally looked over at me and he said, I just want you to know it is so good. I'm going to the elders to see if we can't go to this format on Sunday morning. 2 minutes.
How about that? Oh, I get you. Oh, me. All right. I should have seen that coming. All right. Our time goes by so fast, but I know you want to talk about, and I want to hear it. India. I know that's been a big part of your life. And I think you've been like 17 trips to do evangelism in India.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. I started in Lexington when, Ed used to come to the lectures and do the lectures for us. Brother Ed Harrell used to come do the lectures. Yeah. And we had been friends for years. I knew him since the late middle 70s when I first started to preach. We became close friends later on. And so he invited me to go with him. I wasn't sure. I didn't want to go sightseeing. I didn't want to go make a trip on the Brethren. I told him, I said, Brother Harold, I said, I'll go with you if you think I can be useful to you. I don't want to go just to pass the time. And he said, no, you can be useful. At that time, there was just Brother Harold, Brother Tom Kinsel, and the late Brother David Owen. Those three had been going for a long time together, but the work was beginning to grow and they needed somebody else and somebody that they could depend on to go. And so I went and worked out well. In those first early years, it was just, we'd go twice a year. And sometimes just Brother Harold and I would go together. And it was the closest thing to a Jerusalem model that I know. We started in a place in South Central India in a place called Hyderabad. Hyderabad is Andhra Pradesh. It's the land of Telugu speaking people. And we started working with Ed, and those three guys had started working with just this one group. And from that group was another group established in the same city, clear across town. I mean, we're talking about a huge city here. And so there was two churches, Balanagar and Mulali, that we worked with. And that's all we worked with. We bring preachers in, we'd study with them. Their philosophy was teach those preachers how to teach and teach them the Bible. They're the ones that need to go out to the villages. They know the customs, they know the language, so on and so forth. And so we did that. From there, after 2 or 3, 4 years of doing that, and they had already, as I said, been doing it for 6 or 7 years before, we decided to go to Bangalore. There was a fellow over there we wanted to talk to who had been coming to our class. And we went from Hyderabad to Bangalore. And then from that point at Bangalore, a church of about 9 people meeting on a rooftop is now about 100, have their own building. Wow. And one of the reasons we pushed building buildings over there is because of the caste system. We obviously, Ed knew a lot of individuals and gave of his own money to build church buildings over there because in the caste system, the untouchables, that is those who are, the lowest of the low, and the upper caste could not have any associations together unless it was at a neutral site, and a prayer hall or a church building was considered a neutral site. And so that's why we pushed for church buildings to be built over there. But it's been a great experience for me. As I said, it's the closest thing to a Jerusalem model I've ever seen, that the word went out. I've seen more of India than most Indians have seen. And every time I run into one here in the States, which are, as you and I both know, there are a ton of them.
Yes.
I ask them where they're from, and then I start talking to them about it, and they said, "You've been to India?" And I said, "Yes, I've been all over India." And so I have traveled quite extensively all over India.
Well, that's great. And look how long we could talk about that. Have you ever thought about writing a book about your experiences?
That's more work than I want to take on.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that's just a thought,
Yeah.
There'd be a lot of,
what I would really like to work on right now is getting some essays by different fellows on the life of Ed Harrell. I'm thinking about doing that. That'd be great. Yeah. There'd be a lot. So I've been approached about doing that. And so I'm thinking about doing that.
I think I would encourage you to do that. We call it the conversion story. Would you share with us one story that you've thought about that you'd like to share with people?
Yeah, well, I lived in Lexington, and you may remember, Dan, because you were one of the elders over Fayette. They were talking about taking the word evolution out of the textbooks and putting in change over time. And the local news station called me one day and asked me about what I thought about. This girl called me and asked me what I thought about it. And I said, well, I think it's really stupid. And that's what I said. And she kind of laughed. She said, what? I said, well, what difference does it make if you call it evolution or change over time? Because evolution just means change over time.
Right.
I said, that's all it means. I said, and I believe in change over time. I just don't believe it's from one species to another. So we had a good talk. She said, can I come out and interview you? And I said, sure. She came out and interviewed me. And, she brought the cameraman and everything. You know how it is. They interview you for 10 minutes. You only get 5 seconds, and that's fine. We ended up talking for 45 minutes with the camera rolling. And then all of a sudden she realized the camera's rolling. She said, turn it off. I just want to talk to him a minute. So we talked a little bit more. And she got ready to leave. And she said, well, I appreciate your time. And I appreciate you answering some questions. And I said, well, you're not going anywhere yet. And she said, why? And I said, it's my turn to ask you some questions. And so we began a conversation. And I asked her where she went. She told me. And she said, I'm not practicing the religion that she was practicing. I was raised that way. And I just have lots of questions. And I've been looking for somebody to talk to. I said, did it ever cross your mind today that you found the guy that you need to talk to?
Wow.
She said, yeah, it has. I said, well, we need to sit down and talk. And so I converted her. She was living with a guy. I converted him because I told her she was about to leave him because she knew it wasn't right. And so I converted him. And so that's one of my favorite stories is, that morning I was sitting in my office, not intending to do anything, but I had remembered a story that Sewell Hall had told about a lady praying for somebody to convert. And I had been praying that. Sewell had been with us in one of our lectureships, and he told that story. And I started praying that. I thought, and so when, that doesn't mean God's just going to drop somebody in on you, but you have to look for the opportunity. Absolutely. And so when this girl came and and I could tell her interest went beyond. And so that's when I said to her, well, I'm going to ask you some questions. And I started asking her some questions. And I said, I'm going to drill you with some questions. And she said, okay. And so I finally led her to the fact that, I need to read the Bible more. I need to do something about it. And so I said, well, why don't we just get together once a week and just study? And I said, and so she was a hard nut to crack. She wanted to believe in science. She wanted to do all that things. But we finally got through, and she was also, I'll tell you another little side event of that. She was in the movie, I can't think about it, Runaway Bride. She was the reporter in Runaway Bride at the end. And so that was her claim to fame. And then she moved off to a bigger market. And I really feel bad that I've lost track of her.
Well, we've had this come up several times and a couple more things here, but the what if, like you were praying, the power of prayer. We could talk about that for a long time. And I really do believe if we pray to God and ask for opportunities to teach, He's going to put them in our path, and we just need to pay attention to who's going by us every day. But look how easy it would have been. So easy for you when she called you, say, well, I'm just too busy to do that. I don't have time to do that interview. Or it would have been so easy for you at the end of the interview to not. What if you had never said, have you ever thought about, other things, spiritual things? And what if you had never brought it up, and again, that's such a powerful thing. But let's talk about Judy for a second, because I've been trying to do that. I think our wives are, and again, I have to be careful how to say this, but in just a lot of preachers' wives, they not appreciated enough, or people don't realize how difficult it can be. And so I'm going to be involved in evangelism, and I'm going to do this. Well, if you're going to do that, then Judy has to understand how that works, right? Because if you're going to study with me, I work during the day. The only time I could ever study with you would be at night, which would be after work hours, or on a weekend. But you were telling us a couple of things about the spaghetti dinner or something. But Judy's
that was in Lexington when we had the devotional for the kids. Because we were at the university, where the building was. It was located for all practical purposes on the campus. And so I saw my wife cook 10 pounds of spaghetti one night to feed all those kids. She fed them every Thursday night. She was going to determine that they're going to get one good meal. And so we made devotional out of it. She fed anywhere from the last years we were there, anywhere from 30 to 50 kids every Thursday. She fed them. Now, I will tell you that in the last year that we were doing that, members finally caught on. Not that it was fine. They caught on and started helping us, giving us money or bringing food themselves. And so it was very helpful. And so, I learned something about that. We could have asked them early on, and they could have gotten involved with it, and it would have been good for them to have gotten involved with it. And I didn't even think about that. I just put it all on my wife. The second thing I want to tell you about Judy is, and I was telling you this the other day, we just moved into a new house, or another house across town, closer to my office here. And we were looking at houses, and she said, when we move the next time, she said, I'll tell you what I would like to do. What do you think about this? She said, I want to put a sign out in our front yard and say, Bible class, everyone welcome, 7:00 on Tuesdays or Thursdays, and just invite the neighborhood and just open up the house and just, no obligation, nothing. Just, we're just going to read from the book of Mark or something. And so she wants to do, and I thought, how come I've never thought of that? Just put a sign out there and she's, just put refreshments, coffee and a Coke or whatever, and cookies or something. And just have a Bible, put it right there in the yard. Now this serves another purpose too, to mention this to you. I don't think you could do that everywhere. I think you can do it down here in the South, where people are very hospitable, we've already had neighbors come to our new house and introduce themselves. You don't get that out in most places anymore. But we've had 2 or 3 neighbors come, introduce themselves, tell us who they are, where they lived. And so, it's a little bit different regionally from that standpoint. I don't think you could do that everywhere, nor do I think you'd want to do that everywhere because of the danger situation, depending on where you live. But then there's guys like, that are going out into the parks up in New York City, Don, and going out there in the park and just opening up and having class. I know converted guys sitting at Chick-fil-A was just doing his Bible lesson where somebody said, what are you doing? And they sat down. He didn't even necessarily go there to convert somebody. He just went to eat and had his Bible and had the computer open. So he decided what he's going to do then was have a PowerPoint presentation on how to be converted. And he would just sit there then from then on, and people come on. And he's, what are you doing? Well, I'm working on this lesson. You want to look at it with me and tell me what you think about it. I thought that was great.
That's good. That's good.
So he had a PowerPoint presentation.
That's right. Yeah. So, brother, we're out of time. This 20 minutes or 25 minutes goes so fast. But if somebody wanted to reach out to you and want to get to know Bill more, would that be okay? And I'm assuming it would be.
As long as they send me a blank check signed.
Blank check. Okay. What would be the best way to get in contact with you? That's good.
You can send me email at billrob1954, billrob1954 @gmail.com. You could reach out to me that way, and then I'll give you my telephone number when you reach out to me, but I don't want to put my telephone number out because I don't know who's listening.
I understand. All right. Well, listen, great to see you again. I'm glad that you guys are doing so well. And hopefully sometime soon we can connect again, have coffee or get to eat or do something. But we would really enjoy that. But keep up your good work there. And again, we appreciate it so much, Bill, that you took the time today to do this interview with us.
Well, I was honored to do it. And you've been a good friend for a long time.
Okay.
Yeah. I moved to Lexington in 94. So it was
94.
shortly after that we met. So
yes. Yeah. Long time ago.
We played golf together. As I said earlier to you, almost went to work for you. I need to tell you that story sometime. I'll tell you on the after show.
Okay. All right. Well, again, tell Judy hi, and God bless you, and keep up your good work, brother. Thank you.
Thank you.
Melt my heart and fill my life. Give me one soul today.